On Moses and the Ten Commandments for Judaism and Christianity. All right, so building off of lesson 1, where we kind of introduced everything, this lesson is on Moses, and to understand Moses, you need to understand the Hebrews. So the Hebrews were around. This whole story and situation is taking around in about 1300 BCE, and so that's a little debated. It's like 1300 to 1500, but most people have settled on about 1300. The Hebrews were a class or a group of people in Egypt that were enslaved, and the Pharaoh at the time was getting concerned that the Hebrews, the slaves that were working, there were too many of them, and he was afraid that the slaves would eventually overthrow him. So what he did was he declared that all of the males that were born for a certain period of time were going to be killed. They were going to be drowned in the River Nile, so that basically there wouldn't be as many Hebrews around. So Moses was a Hebrew, and his mother, in order to protect him, because he was born during this time where all of the Hebrew sons were being drowned in the river, she put him in this basket ark situation, and she kind of sent him down the river, hoping that someone would find him, as the story goes in the Old Testament. And this is all recorded. I'm getting this all from the Bible. This is where this story is recorded. It's in the Bible. And so Moses is put down the river, and the Pharaoh's daughter, Bithia, finds Moses in this basket, and she kind of takes him and raises her as her own. And so Moses is basically raised without knowing that he is a Hebrew and not knowing about his past until he gets older. Okay, so eventually Moses finds out that he was a Hebrew, and the story in the Bible tells that he hears a message from God telling him to go to the Pharaoh and demand that the people get set free. So what happens is he goes to the Pharaoh, and he asks the Pharaoh to let the Hebrews go, and the Pharaoh says no, and Moses leaves, and a plague comes. The Nile turns to the blood. These were all the 10 plagues that happened. And so, in one instance, the River Nile turned to blood. In another instance, frogs are like raining down from the sky. In another one, locusts come and take over. There's all these things that are happening. Each time he says no. Eventually, he says that the firstborn of everyone is like the firstborn of every family is going to die unless they put lamb's blood above their doors. And so this supposedly, or according to the story, this happens. And then the Pharaoh finally gives in and says that they can go. And this story is all described in the Exodus. So this picture right here, you see all these people and there's water parting. And in the story, this story called which is what we call as the Exodus. So over here it says one of the books in the Old Testament is called the Exodus. There's Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy are the first books. And those are the ones we're talking about kind of right now. And in Exodus, it's telling this whole story about the plagues and the locusts and eventually them going. And so eventually the Pharaoh says that they can go. And so the Hebrew people, you can see here, they start leaving and they come to a sea, and kind of the Pharaoh decides after they leave, you know what, I want my slaves back. And so he chases them in the army, and they're all stuck at this sea. And so Moses asks God to part the waters, and the waters part. The Hebrews can get across the sea by walking through this path from the parted waters. And then once they get across, the waters fall down and like engulf the army and kill off the Egyptian army. And this when we're talking about this story, this is what we refer to as the Exodus. The Exodus means like they're leaving. It's the Hebrews getting out of Egypt. And so they get out of Egypt, and then Moses essentially is leading the Hebrews through the desert for the next 40 years, looking for a place to settle down. One of the things that happens when they're out in the desert is the Ten Commandments. And so at some point in time, Moses climbs Mount Sinai. Keep in mind, I'm like blazing over 40 years of this. So Moses climbs Mount Sinai to talk to God. And when he gets up there, God gives him 10 basic rules about how to live. And so these were the commandments. You should have no other gods before me. So, the Hebrew God is the only God. There isn't any others. You can't make any idols of anything. You can't use the Lord's name in vain. You need to remember the Sabbath day. The Sabbath day was, according to Genesis, God, which is the first book of the Bible, God made everything, the whole universe and everything, in 6 days, and he rested on the 7th. And so the idea that the Hebrews had was that the Sabbath day is the 7th day, and they're going to rest as well. You need to honor your father and mother. You shouldn't murder. You shouldn't commit adultery. Adultery is like cheating on people, having sex outside of marriage. You shouldn't steal. You shouldn't bear false witness against your neighbor. That means like don't lie about what people have done or make things up about people. Be honest. And you shall not covet, or sometimes it's like you shouldn't be jealous. You shouldn't want what other people have. And so that brings us to the Torah. I kind of referred to this a bit ago. The Torah is the first 5 books of the Bible, right here. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So these 5 books are part of the Old Testament in the Bible, and they are called the Torah or the Pentateuch. And Torah means he taught, and it's often called the Torah because these first books of the Bible much of them are laws, right? The Genesis kind of is about the origin of everything. Exodus goes into the Exodus as I just described. Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy are lots and lots of laws. Detailed lists of laws that the Hebrew and the Jewish people would follow. And so that's kind of where the name Torah comes from. It's also called the Pentateuch at times because the Pentateuch means 5 scrolls, and when they would have written this, it was all handwritten on scrolls like this. So that is where the name comes from. So the work for this chapter is to read chapter 2 and do the assignments in Google Classroom.